Welcome back to Benny's Custom Works, proudly supported by Sparesbox. Today we're back on the GTR. We're putting a new clutch in it. We're basically just going back to an OEM style of clutch. This thing does have either a super single or some sort of twin plate in it because it's got that sort of typical Japanese clutch rattle to it. But today that will be no more. Basically, long story short, I was driving this thing last week, just putting it around town. And what I believe's happened is the thrust bearing's actually punched through the middle of the fingers, most likely because it's worn, which basically as the clutch wears, the fingers lift up, which by default means they separate. Basically the OD of the bearing's probably slightly too small for the finger setup, and I think it's just fallen through the guts of it. So what we're gonna do is basically rip the shifter out. Once that's out, go up, pull the box out, change the flow oil and clutch, and put it all back together, and then by lunchtime we should be done and lapping it around again. So let's get into it. Got the fluids draining out of the transmission, so now's the time to remove our Attessa or all-wheel drive solenoid. So this is kind of like a clutch slave cylinder on steroids. So there's an electronic pump in the back that supplies hydraulic pressure to this solenoid or slave cylinder, depending on how you want to look at it, that then basically activates a clutch inside the transfer case, which then sends drive to this side of the transfer case, which drives the prop shaft. There's two ways you can remove this from the transmission. You can either undo the line and then leave the piston in the transfer case, which means you don't have to drain the fluid of the transfer case. But the downside of that is you have to bleed the Attessa system, and that is a lot more complicated than just filling the transfer case up. So what we're going to do is actually remove the solenoid or the slave cylinder completely, and then that will just be able to hang back here on the hose. Then that's basically going to avoid having to bleed the Attessa. This does have fresh fluid in it anyway. It was bled fairly recently. That also means we can fix the oil leak, which is currently coming from the Attessa slave cylinder. I did mention in a previous video that these have an O-ring in it, but even with O-rings, I've still seen them, with new O-rings, I've seen them still leak. So what we're gonna do is clean the existing orange elastic off, and then we're gonna use the correct grey elastic, or grey silicone, should I say, to get the job done. So we'll be able to stop oil leaks and change our clutch in one go. So should be a good thing. We'll knock this out and happy days. Got the transmission out of the GTR. We've got the clutch fork in my hand. Not quite the failure that I predicted. The pivot ball's actually sheared off at the thread point basically. So hopefully we'll be able to drill out the broken bolt and just replace it. I do have a box of random Nissan clutch parts. Ironically, I bought that online just popped up fairly cheap for just a miscellaneous assortment of like pivot balls and thrust bearing carriers, and I think there's even like a 350Z fork or something in there as well. So now the job is to drill that out, and hopefully we can salvage that front plate. If we can't, I do have another gearbox we can steal one off, but we'd then have to replace it. But at least it will mean still getting this thing back together today. So we'll definitely try drilling that out first, because hopefully it's sheared because of force on here, not because of a bound up thread. So realistically, we should be able to just drill the center of that out. I do have some left-handed drills. That is a real thing. It's not some stupid send the apprentice down to buy left-handed drills thing. So the idea of a left-handed drill is that when you're drilling the hole, it actually tries to unscrew the bolt while you're drilling the hole. So you drill it first, and if worst case, you still just drill the hole and you can put an easy out to pull the broken bolt out. But 9 times out of 10, the drill bit itself actually grabs and just winds the broken bolt or the broken stud out. So hopefully that'll work for us today. So we'll try drilling it first. But yeah, worst case, we can change that whole end plate over and still have a functioning vehicle, hopefully by the end of the day. Well, that's us pretty much done for another day. We've got our twin plate ATS clutch now swapped out to an Excedy organic heavy duty. That should make it nicer to drive. It should be silent in operation now. Those ATSs, their old school kind of twin plate design means they rattle when you put your foot on the clutch. So it's not really something that we want to have with this restoration of sorts. So we're definitely on the right path to putting stuff back to original. We've still got the clutch bleeding, it's gravity bleeding, but it's going to take a while to get that 100%. So we thought we'd just pack it up and pretty much let it go. But thanks for watching, guys, and we'll see you next time.